The night my husband threw my bags on the wet grass, his whole family stood behind him and laughed. I stood there in the rain with nothing but a suitcase and my pride in pieces. What none of them knew was that by morning, I would be walking into a $30 million mansion that had been mine all along. This is the night everything changed. Hey, welcome back to the channel. Before I get into this story, I want you to do something for me. If you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever been made to feel small by people who were supposed to love you, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications because this story is for you. Comment below and tell me where you're watching from tonight. And I promise you, stay until the end because what happens in this story will give you chills. Let's get into it. My name doesn't matter right now. What matters is what happened to me 8 years into my marriage, in a house that was never really mine, surrounded by people who never really wanted me there. I was 26 years old when I met him. He was charming, confident, came from money, and for the first time in my life, someone made me feel like I was worth something. I had my own life before him. I was an architect. I had a small design studio that I built from nothing, working late nights, drawing blueprints by hand before I could even afford good software. I was proud of that studio. It was the one thing in the world that was completely mine. When we got married, everything changed. His family had old money, the kind of money that comes with rules nobody says out loud but everybody follows. And one of those rules was that his wife didn't work, not because she couldn't, but because it didn't look right. It made the family seem like they needed the extra income. So 6 months into the marriage, his mother sat me down over tea and told me so sweetly, so gently, that it was time for me to focus on being a wife. Not a business owner, a wife. I remember calling my clients one by one to tell them I was closing the studio. I remember packing up the office I built with my own hands. And I remember crying in the car afterward, telling myself this was what love required: sacrifice. That's what I called it back then, sacrifice. What I didn't tell anyone, not even my husband, was that a year before I met him, my grandmother had passed away. She was a quiet woman most people underestimated her whole life. But what people didn't know was that she had built a real estate empire decades earlier, back when women who looked like us weren't even allowed to walk into certain banks, let alone own property in certain neighborhoods. She fought for every single thing she owned. And when she passed, she left me something: a house in Malibu, a mansion really, worth more money than I could wrap my head around at the time. But she left it to me with one condition, written in her own handwriting in the letter that came with the will. She said, "Don't use this unless you truly need it. Let it sit quietly until the day comes when you have nowhere else to go. That house will always be there for you, waiting the way I wish someone had waited for me when I was young." I never told my husband about that house, not because I was hiding money from him out of greed, but because some part of me deep down knew. I knew that his family already saw me as an outsider. I knew that the moment they found out I had that kind of wealth sitting quietly under my name, they would either try to control it or resent me for not handing it over. So I kept it to myself. I paid a caretaker quietly every month to maintain the property. I never even visited it after the funeral. It just sat there waiting the way my grandmother said it would. Meanwhile, my marriage slowly became something I didn't recognize. It started small. Comments about how I dressed, how I spoke, how I didn't come from the kind of family they were used to. His mother would introduce me to her friends and somehow always find a way to mention that I used to run some little design business, like it was a hobby, like it was nothing. His sisters would exchange looks when I spoke at dinner, the kind of looks that told me I would never truly belong at that table, no matter how many years I sat at it. My husband saw all of this, and in the beginning, he would apologize for it privately. He would tell me not to take it personally, that his family just needed time to warm up to me. Years passed, and that warming up never came. Instead, I watched him slowly stop defending me at all. It was easier for him to stay quiet than to stand up to the people who raised him. I gave up my independence for that family. I gave up my studio, my clients, my identity outside of being someone's wife. I had no money of my own that wasn't given to me through an allowance his mother controlled through the family accountant. Every dollar I spent, I had to explain. Every trip to see my own family, I had to justify. I became a woman who asked permission to breathe in her own life. And still I stayed, because leaving felt like failing, because I thought love meant enduring. The night everything broke happened at his younger brother's engagement party. It was a big event, the kind his family loved to throw to remind everyone how much money they had. I got there a little late because of traffic, nothing dramatic, just 15 minutes. But the moment I walked in, his mother made a comment in front of everyone about how I never took anything seriously, not even something as important as family. I tried to laugh it off. I tried to keep the peace the way I always did. But one of his sisters kept pushing, bringing up old arguments, old grievances, things that had nothing to do with that night. And I finally said something back. I finally, after 8 years, defended myself out loud in front of everyone. The room went quiet. And then I looked at my husband, hoping, praying, that this would be the moment he finally stood beside me instead of behind his family. He didn't. He looked at me in front of his entire family, in front of people I barely knew, and he said the words that broke something inside me permanently. He said I had always been the problem. He said maybe it was time I understood that I never really fit into this family, and maybe I never would. I stood there in silence, waiting for him to take it back, to say he didn't mean it, to remember the 8 years we built together. He didn't. Instead, his mother stepped forward and said it was time for me to leave. Not just the party, the house, our house. The one I had lived in for 8 years, decorated with my own hands, cooked in every single night. And my husband, the man I had given up my career for, the man I stood beside through every family dinner that made me feel small, walked to our bedroom, grabbed my suitcase, threw whatever he could find into it without care, and carried it to the front door himself. I remember standing on the porch, rain starting to fall, watching him set my bag down on the wet grass like it meant nothing, like I meant nothing. His family stood behind him in the doorway. Some of them were actually laughing, laughing like this was entertainment for them. Like watching a woman lose everything she built her life around was some kind of show. I picked up my suitcase, soaked from the rain, and I didn't say a word. I didn't cry in front of them. I refused to give them that. I walked to my car, sat inside, and let the tears fall only once the door was closed and they couldn't see me anymore. I sat in that car for almost an hour, completely lost. Every phone call I could make ran through my head. My sister would let me stay with her, but I didn't want anyone in my family seeing me like this, broken over a marriage they warned me about years ago. Friends from before the marriage had slowly faded away because his family didn't approve of most of them. I was in that moment completely alone, and then I remembered the letter, my grandmother's letter, the one that had been sitting in a small fireproof box in my closet for 8 years, a closet I hadn't even had time to grab from. But I remembered the name, the lawyer's name. Her name had been etched into my memory since the day of the funeral, a woman my grandmother trusted with everything she built. I searched through my email until I found an old message, one where the lawyer had given me her direct number in case I ever needed anything. It was almost midnight. I sat in my car outside a house I could no longer call home, and I called a number I hadn't used in 8 years. She picked up on the third ring. I explained everything through tears, the party, the family, my husband, the suitcase on the wet grass. And she listened quietly until I was finished. And then she said the words that changed the entire direction of my life. She said, "It's time, your grandmother knew this day might come. The house has been ready for you this whole time. Just say the word and I'll have everything arranged by morning." I didn't even have to think twice. I told her yes. That night I checked into a small hotel near the highway, the kind of place with thin walls and old carpet, but it didn't matter. For the first time in years, I could breathe without someone watching how I breathed. I didn't sleep much. I just sat by the window, replaying the last 8 years of my life, wondering how I let myself shrink so small for people who never truly valued me. The next morning, a car arrived exactly when the lawyer said it would. A driver, professional, respectful, opened the door for me like I was someone important, someone worth showing up for. We drove for hours, the city fading behind us, the ocean slowly coming into view. I didn't know exactly where we were going, not really, not until the car turned onto a private road lined with tall gates and untouched greenery. The gates opened, and there it was. A mansion so large it barely looked real, sitting quietly on a cliff overlooking the ocean, exactly the way my grandmother had left it. The caretaker, an older man who had been maintaining the property faithfully for years without ever meeting me in person, stood at the entrance with a warm smile, like he had been waiting for this exact day just as much as I had. He handed me the keys personally and said, "Your grandmother told me one day you'd come home. She said to tell you when you finally walked through these doors that she was proud of you for surviving long enough to get here." I broke down right there at the entrance, not out of sadness, out of relief, out of finally understanding what my grandmother meant when she said some doors are meant to open only when you truly need them to. I walked through room after room of a house I had never physically stepped foot in, but somehow it felt like it had been waiting for me my entire life. Floor-to-ceiling windows facing the ocean, a library filled with books my grandmother had collected over decades. Photographs of her, young and fierce, standing in front of properties she built when the world told her she couldn't. For the first time in 8 years, I stood in a space that was completely undeniably mine. No permission needed, no approval required. No family watching, waiting for me to make a mistake they could hold against me. I spent the first few days in that house simply existing, walking along the private beach behind the property, sitting quietly on the balcony with coffee, watching the sunrise without anyone questioning where I was or who I was talking to. I called my sister and told her everything. She cried on the phone with me, not out of shock about the money, but out of relief that I had finally found peace after years of watching me disappear inside that marriage. Word travels fast, especially in circles built on image and reputation. It didn't take long for the truth to reach my husband's family. A mutual friend mentioned seeing me at a property in Malibu. Someone else recognized the address from public real estate records tied to my grandmother's name. Eventually, it reached him directly. He called me 3 days after the party. I almost didn't answer, but something in me wanted to hear what he had to say, wanted to see if the man who threw my suitcase onto wet grass would show even a flicker of the person I once loved. His voice was different, softer, almost desperate. He asked where I was staying. I told him the truth plainly without emotion. He went quiet for a long moment and then he asked if the property in Malibu was really mine. I told him yes, it always had been. He started apologizing, rushing through excuses about the party, about his family, about the pressure he felt his whole life to please them instead of protecting me. He said he wanted to fix things. He said we could start over, somewhere new, just the two of us. I let him speak until he was finished, and then I said something I had never been able to say in 8 years of marriage. I told him that the night he threw my bag onto the grass, in front of his family, without hesitation, without a single word in my defense, he showed me exactly who he was when it mattered most. I told him I didn't need him to fix anything because for the first time I wasn't broken. I was free. He tried one more time, showing up at the gates of the property a week later, along with his mother, hoping proximity to wealth would soften me the way it always seemed to soften everyone else in that family. The caretaker met them at the gate instead of letting them through. I watched from the window as they stood there, confused, small, standing outside a wall they could not talk their way through. For the first time in years, I felt nothing when I looked at them. No anger. No desire for revenge, just quiet, calm distance. I didn't need to scream at them. I didn't need to remind them of every cruel word they said to me over 8 years. My silence said more than any argument ever could. The woman they underestimated, the woman they threw out into the rain, was standing in a home worth more than every property their family had ever collected combined. In the months that followed, I slowly rebuilt myself piece by piece. I reopened my design studio, this time inside a converted section of the mansion overlooking the ocean. I reconnected with old clients who remembered my work fondly, and new ones found me through word of mouth. I filled that house with laughter again, inviting my sister, my old friends, people who valued me long before any of this wealth existed. Looking back now, I understand something my grandmother tried to teach me long before I ever needed it. She always said that quiet strength outlasts loud cruelty. She said some people will only respect you once they see what you're capable of, but the ones who truly love you respect you long before that. I spent 8 years shrinking myself to fit into a family that never intended to make space for me. I spent 8 years believing that love meant losing pieces of myself for people who never once tried to understand who I really was. And it took being thrown out into the rain, losing everything I thought mattered, to finally step into everything that was always meant to be mine. If you're watching this and you're in a situation where you feel small, where you feel like you're constantly proving your worth to people who will never truly see you, I want you to hear this clearly. Sometimes the very thing that feels like the end of your world is actually the beginning of the life you were always meant to have. Don't be afraid to walk away from people who make you feel like you don't belong. Somewhere, quietly waiting, is a version of your life far greater than the one you're settling for. If this story touched you the way I think it did, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications because there's more where this came from. Drop a comment below and let me know, would you have gone back or would you have stayed gone like I did? I read every single comment, so don't be shy. And if you know someone who needs to hear this story tonight, do me a favor and share it with them. Thank you for staying until the very end with me. I'll see you in the next one.